to welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations at Pakistan's Foreign Office. Mr. Secretary General, as you stand here today, a third of my country's landmass is underwater. 1 in 7 people, 33 to 35 million people have been devastated by what you've called a monsoon on steroids. Our people, their lives, have lost their lives, their livelihoods, are facing the very real threat of hunger, disease, and further devastation. As you have mentioned, this is not simply about solidarity. It is a question of justice. The Pakistani citizen of Larkana, of Nasirabad, of DG Khan, of Gilgit-Baltistan, of Nowshera, who've had all of their possessions taken away from them, did not contribute to the catastrophe that they are facing today. This climate catastrophe, as Julian said earlier this week, is a fancy way of saying it is the price tag we pay for the industrialization of richer countries. Your Excellency, as the Foreign Minister and the government of Pakistan, I am conveying to you and to the world that at this point in time, I am unable to get the resources required to these people who are in desperate situations. My party's slogan is food, clothing, and shelter. I cannot shelter 33 million families. I cannot provide the food and clothing for 35 million families. We don't have the infrastructure in place. And this is just the rescue and relief phase. 1,300 people have died so far, a third of which are children. And they are staring death in the face because disease, waterborne diseases, an army of mosquitoes, of other bacteria and viruses threaten them. As our community workers, our lady healthcare workers, our medical professionals are working around the clock, they cannot cover 35 million people. And going forward, as the waters drain, we will rebuild. We have to rebuild our lives, we have to rebuild their lives, we have to rebuild their houses, we have to rebuild their schools, we have to rebuild their hospitals, they have to rebuild their infrastructure. And we know that we cannot do this alone, but we will do this together. And I cannot tell you how heartened we are by the support we have received by yourself and from the United Nations. So soon after this catastrophe, you've arrived here yourself. I told you earlier that your resident coordinator has been driving around our country, from Balochistan through floodwaters of Sindh, all over the place. We are incredibly grateful to the United Nations. And I must say, a whole generation of Pakistanis, and we can't necessarily blame them, who might have a more cynical view of the United Nations. Today, your actions, your love, your support to us in this incredibly difficult time has reignited the faith of a generation of Pakistanis in the United Nations. And this is the generation that has to suffer the cost of climate change. I look forward, Your Excellency, to working with you and working with your team, not only to save the people of my country, but to work with other developing countries who have not contributed to the catastrophe of climate change, but are paying with their lives and livelihoods. And we have confidence. We have confidence in the United Nations. We have confidence in our international partners that they will not leave us in our difficult times. And we will build Pakistan back and build back better. Once again, Your Excellency, we're incredibly grateful for your presence.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your kind words. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good afternoon. I'm here to express my deep solidarity with the Pakistani people over the devastating loss of life, human suffering, and physical damage caused by this year's floods a product of the intensification of climate change. Today, I was briefed by Prime Minister Sharif, Foreign Minister Bhutto, and other senior members of the government on the latest developments. Some regions of Pakistan have just experienced their wettest August on record, and rainfall in some provinces was up to 8 times higher than usual. Climate change is there. And tomorrow I'll see the impact of the floods in different areas of the country. But we have all seen media images of the extraordinary destruction. And I can only imagine the power and ferocity of the water as it bore down on villages, roads, bridges, and everything else in its path. It was clearly terrifying, a wall of water. And my heart goes out to everyone who has lost loved ones in the tragedy, and all those who have been affected by the loss of their homes, their businesses, and their livelihoods. I visited Pakistan many times when I was High Commissioner for Refugees. And Pakistan hosts one of the most effective and generous refugee operations of the world in support to millions of Afghans. So this is not my first visit to Pakistan. I have a love affair with the Pakistani people now for 17 years. I was, in 2005, talking to the victims of the earthquake. I remember the devastation of the floods in 2010. And I remember being with displaced people when you had this terrorist attack going down the Swat Valley and coming close to Islamabad, and seeing how dramatic their situation is. And many times in Baluchistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I saw how Afghan communities were generously hosting Afghan refugees. And one thing I always discovered in Pakistan was the way people would support other people, Pakistanis or Afghans. Communities would support other communities with an enormous sense of generosity and solidarity. And so it is very emotional for me to see the level of suffering that so many Pakistanis are having at the present moment. Because it is heartbreaking to see such a generous people going through this crisis. No country deserves this fate, but particularly no countries like Pakistan that have done almost nothing to contribute to global warming. Pakistan and other developing countries, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel, are paying a horrific price for the intransigence of big emitters that continue to bet on fossil fuels in the face of science, common sense, and basic human decency. Even today, emissions are rising as people die in floods and famines. And this is insanity. This is collective suicide. From Pakistan, I'm issuing a global appeal. Stop the madness, end the war with nature, invest in renewable energy now. And as the crisis gathers pace, it is clear that most countries are nowhere near prepared. Developed countries must step up and provide Pakistan and other countries on the front lines with the financial and technical resources they need to survive extreme weather events like these deadly floods. Half of all climate finance must go to adaptation and resilience in the developing world. And developed countries must produce a credible roadmap to back their commitment to double their financial support. Loss and damage from the climate crisis is not a future event. It is happening now, all around us. And I urge governments to address this issue at COP27 with the seriousness it deserves. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, the United Nations is on the ground to support the Pakistani government's relief efforts. We and the civil society are making good use of the funds released from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, and we are stepping up our efforts through an air bridge from Dubai. Our people have delivered food or cash assistance to hundreds of thousands of people in Balochistan and Sindh, tons of emergency supplies to support children and women. But let's be clear, what we have done is a drop in the ocean of the needs of the Pakistani people. Hundreds of thousands of people are living in camps, and many more, 6 million, as far as I know, are with host communities that are sharing everything with them. An important reason for my visit is to draw the attention of the international community to this climate catastrophe and to appeal to massive support. Pakistan needs massive financial support for the relief and then for the recovery. And as I said this morning, and I repeat, it's not a matter of solidarity or generosity, it's a matter of justice. Before I conclude, allow me to say a few words about the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. On behalf of the United Nations, I extend my sincere condolences to the Queen's family and to the people of the United Kingdom and the wider Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth exemplified the values of calmness, dignity and grace. For as long as I can remember, she has been a reassuring presence on the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, for better time management, I would like to request you to pose a single, concise question so that we can have the corresponding answers. Gentlemen, on the right side, yes.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency. It's Jiang Chao with China.
No Excellency.
It's Jiang Chao with China's Xinhua News. Sorry, I will speak louder. It's Jiang Chao with China's Xinhua News Agency. We have witnessed such a huge loss and damage in Pakistan due to flood and world climate change. And I said that during a recent interview, Pakistani UN Ambassador Mr. Munir Akram said that Pakistan is one of the smallest emitters of carbon, while one of the largest victims of climate change. And it is the industrial countries, while have for the last 200 years contributed to global warming, and it is in developing countries, mostly like Pakistan, who are the victims. Therefore, for such damage, there should be some mechanism for loss and damage to compensate for those countries for the impact that they are facing because of the historical policies of industrialized countries that contributed to global warming. So how do you comment on it? Thank you.
Well, it is obviously that there are a number of countries in the world. We calculate about 15 hotspots where countries are particularly vulnerable and are already paying a heavy price in relation to climate change. Climate change is not a problem of the future. Climate change is a problem of today. It is happening. People are suffering. And that is why I said in my intervention, and I repeat now, the questions of loss and damage need to be seriously discussed. And that discussion, that I hope will take place in the COP in Cairo, hopefully will be translated by an effective support from the developed world to the most impacted developing countries to build resilience and to adapt to the circumstances that were created by others. And that is why this is not a matter of generosity, it's a matter of justice.
Gentleman in the third row. Hannes.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the visiting dignitary. You've talked about justice to the Pakistanis precisely because of this climate change. But we've seen that the UN flash appeal is just $160 million, while the initial estimates are about $10 billion, and that can go up. So what will the UN do from your office to ensure that this appeal is magnified, this scope the horizon is widened up, and that justice monetarily for the people of Pakistan is ensured? Thank you.
When there is a crisis anywhere in the world, we issue in the next few days a so-called flash appeal. And the flash appeal has not as an objective to gather the funds to solve the problem. It has as an objective to raise some funds to start being able to act. We need much more than what was in that flash appeal. And especially the government of Pakistan must be supported directly by the international community. We have discussed today the possibility of organizing, and we are ready to organize it together with the Pakistani government. Of course, this is a decision for the Pakistani government to take. As soon as there is a clear assessment of the needs, both in relation to relief, but also in relation to rehabilitation and reconstruction, to organize an international conference aiming of a global mobilization of support to Pakistan at the levels which are many billion, let's be clear, at the levels that will be necessary to solve the problem. Flash appeals are something that we launch in any circumstances in the world, just to allow for agencies to start providing the minimum relief of the first days.
Thank you. A little bit of gender balance, Madam Sumaira.
Thank you, Excellency. This is Sumaira Khan from Sama Television. Sir, my question would be, you just talked about a conference, and I was about to ask that is there any donors conference on card, and if the Pakistani government and sorry?
Is there
any donor conference on the card?
I was about to ask you the same question. You just hinted upon that there would be there are chances of having a conference once the estimates are clear. So first part of my question would be from you, that if we are going to hold a donors conference, keeping in the view scenarios of the refugee situation as well, because we just had fall of Kabul last year and Russia-Ukraine situation as well. So having those scenarios simultaneously going on, do you think the other governments would be generous enough to contribute their wealth and their resources for the flood effectees of Pakistan? And second part is from the respected Foreign Minister of Pakistan. Sir, if there is a donor conference, how we are planning to present our facts and figures to the international community, and specifically are we doing something about like attracting the other organization, OIC for instance, and the forums we have for the Muslim Ummah?
Thank you.
Of course, I am worried with the fact that we are witnessing some reductions in official development aid, and that we have several of our operations severely underfunded. So there is a concern in relation to that. But this is not a usual event. This is an unprecedented event. And so I think this will, first of all, help us put again climate change in the front line of the international agenda. Climate change has been losing ground in international agenda, both in relation to the political development and in relation to even the media coverage. And it's absolutely essential to put it again in the international agenda, because climate change is the defining issue of our time. And based on that, I have hopes that a conference being able to show, and I mean the images are absolutely, appalling. I believe a conference will be able to make conscience of people work and to mobilize the support that is needed. And this support is not only thinking about these floods. Let's not forget that monsoons have not ended, that the melting of glaciers will go on and for a number of years will still increase. So we need to support Pakistan to be prepared for the future, not only to respond to the present crisis.
Thank you for your question. First of all, I want to reiterate how grateful we are to the United Nations. There are scenarios where you're in a difficult situation and you say that I am facing this problem, I need help. In this situation, it wasn't that Pakistan reached out to the United Nations or the Secretary General and said, sir, we need your help. The Secretary General, on his own accord, is here, ready and willing to help. So I think it speaks to the compassion of the Secretary General of the United Nations and his leadership, that he has owned our crisis, that is not only a Pakistani crisis, but is a global crisis. As far as your questions about the donor conference is concerned, so we've already had our flash appeal, like the Secretary General said. It's an initial appeal just for the basic, to sort of get things going. As far as the donor conference is concerned, that we are waiting for our damage assessment, a joint damage assessment, to be comprehensively completed. At the moment, we are still in the rescue and relief phase. We are still saving people from imminent danger, and we are still desperately trying to get rations and relief to those who need it. As we speak, places like Dadu and Sevan are desperately trying to save their populations from inundation, from flooding, while smaller towns and villages are being inundated by floodwater. One of the largest, if not the largest lake in Asia has broken its banks not once, not twice, but thrice. So we're still facing the sort of calamity itself. Once the water recedes, you will have a comprehensive damage needs assessment that will put us in a position to work with the international community. And we're very grateful once again that, and rather than me asking the Secretary General that, sir, I need your help for a donors conference, he himself has offered his good offices to support us in that event when the time comes.
With your permission, maybe two last questions, Mr. Baraja, followed by Mr. Madeen Haider.